This is the quote we're going to be creating. It says, "You are magical," and has tons of flourishing, which are these embellishments around the letters. We're also going to add some gold onto the letters directly, as well as make some glitter on our background. So I'm going back to my gallery and creating a new canvas that is the size of my screen, but I'm going to turn it so that it's in this orientation. For lettering, it's always best to use guidelines. You can use your drawing guide, your grid that comes with the app, or you can import guidelines. I'm just importing some that I have saved on my iPad and fitting it to the screen so it's bigger. Since these are my guidelines, I don't want to actually write directly onto this layer, so I'm going to lock the layer to prevent myself from writing on it. Add a new layer for my lettering. The brush that I'm going to be using for this is in this brush set from Design Cuts, the Procreate brush calligraphy set. And these brushes are really cool to use for calligraphy because they respond to the amount of pressure that you use. So right now with this Apple pencil, because it's pressure sensitive, if you press hard, you can create a different weight of the line than if you press lightly. They also have some really cool textures built in, so this chalk brush looks like you're writing with a piece of chalk digitally, which is really cool. Just gives you this really awesome look with different settings within these brushes. So this is the brush I'm going to be using. It's called Vertex. I did make one tiny adjustment to it in the Brush Studio. The original brush under the Apple Pencil properties, originally the flow was set to a higher amount, which makes it so that the thin strokes are more transparent. I actually changed that to 0 just so that all of my strokes are not transparent. So actually let me go back to my Brush Studio by tapping on the brush and showing you really quickly Streamline. So Streamline is a slider that you can change here under the stroke path in Brush Studio. And just to show you what happens, let me put it to 0, and I'm going to clear this drawing pad. And when I draw some lines when it's at 0, the curves are following exactly what I'm doing with my hand, but watch what happens when you turn the streamline up. The curves start to smooth out and almost self-correct as you're drawing. So this is pretty helpful for lettering because it helps your lines stay nice and smooth. I like to keep mine somewhere around 80%. So this is the brush that we are going to use for the lettering. I'm gonna delete that layer and add a new fresh layer to start with my draft of my lettering. So the quote is, "You are magical." This is my draft layer, and sometimes with a draft you might think to use something like a pencil or a monoline brush or something that you can kind of sketch with. I like to use the final brush that I'm going to use for my final lettering because then it will end up being the same thickness between the letters, and I won't have to worry about changing the thickness. You can see that this line has thickness to it because of the pressure of the brush, so I want to make sure that my weight of my line is going to be the same in my draft as it is in the final piece. So here we have "you are." I'm going to add a new layer for the word magical. When you're doing lettering, and really any kind of art that requires or that involves doing a draft, it's really helpful to use layers for your different components. And I'll show you why after I finish writing this word magical. So what I'm doing here is I'm writing my letters, but on the downstrokes, I'm pressing harder to get that thick line to appear, and then on the upstrokes, like this part, I'm pressing lighter. That gives us the contrast. That makes it look like calligraphy. So my word magical is on a separate layer. I have that layer selected, and if I tap on the arrow up here, I can actually move it around separately from my words "you are." I'm just going to shift it over to the right a little bit. If you have magnetics turned on, then you're able to shift following those blue lines that it snaps to, so you know you're moving it perfectly horizontal or vertical. Let's add a new layer now for the Flourish drafts. So flourishing is basically just embellishing, and what you're doing is extending the letters that already exist. So for example, this Y, instead of just making a loop and going into the next letter, I'm going to extend the loop and come out here to the right. So it looks like I just drew over the word magical, but because this is on a new layer, I'm not actually drawing on top of it. I can go back to my magical layer and move it down so it's not interfering with that flourish. And I can actually move my flourish up as well, or move it over, reposition it because it's on its own layer. So this is helpful for creating a layout. You can create all of your flourishes on separate layers, or what I'm going to do is make the flourish for the top layer or for the top line on the same layer, and then I'll make a new one for the bottom. So I've been practicing flourishing for a long time, which is why it looks like super easy when I'm doing it. But if you've never tried it before, it's actually not as easy as it looks. It takes a lot of planning ahead to make these shapes, to know exactly what path you're going to follow, where to add the shading, and what direction to move your pen. You can watch my hand as I'm doing this, so I'm actually kind of gliding on the screen, which helps make it more smooth. You also might notice that I keep undoing what I just did. So if you draw something and then you tap with 2 fingers, it does undo. Tap with 3 fingers is redo. So I'll just make one more try at this flourish here. This is still my draft, so I can still make changes if I want. And then I'll add another new layer to make the flourishes for the word magical in case I want to move anything around later. So this end of this G is a really good spot to add a big flourish at the bottom. I'm trying to make my flourishes about the same width as my thin strokes, and I add a little bit of shading in some areas. I'm just going to do that one more time. Okay, so there's the G, and then I'm going to extend the top of this L, loop it around, and then go directly into the dot of the I like that. And these flourishes might interact here with the L and the E. To show that again a little slower, I'm coming around, wrapping around that I, maybe crossing through that E, and finishing by curling in for that I. I'm also going to add one at the beginning of the M, and add a dot because I added a dot that goes into this I, so I think I'm going to do that for all of them. Add a little dot at the end of the flourish to make it look more cohesive. So I just went back to my layer that I had these flourishes on and added those dots. So now if I want to move the word magical, this is my magical layer, layer 3, and this is the layer that has the magical flourishes on it. So to move 2 layers at the same time, if you want to move them together, instead of moving one and then moving the other, you can actually select both. So choose the first one, and then while that one is highlighted in blue, swipe to choose the next one, and now they're both highlighted. Now you can tap the arrow and move them together. So I just want to reposition it slightly. And then I want to make the entire phrase centered. I already have 2 layers selected. I'll select all of them, and at this point I'm actually going to group all of these 4 layers together by hitting group. So now they're all in one group, and if I tap on the group, you can actually rename. It's good practice to rename your layers and your groups as you go. I'm just not doing it right now just to save some time. But now I have the group selected, and if I hit the arrow, I can move the entire group at once. So I can move it to make it more centered. I know that this is going to end up lower down on my project because I'm adding glitter at the top. So right now I'll move it down. Also right now, if you wanted to resize anything, so maybe the Y is a little bit too big. So the Y is on this layer, layer 2. I can select just the Y by going to the select tool next to the arrow. If I choose freehand, I can trace around the part that I want to fix, and then choose the arrow. And at this point now I can make the Y bigger or smaller. I can move it around. And it's really important that if you want to resize anything, that you do it in this draft stage rather than waiting till the final product, because you can see if I just show you, make this really big, it becomes a little blurry on the sides. I'm going to undo that, just make it a tiny bit smaller. Okay, and also at this point, if you have any other edits to make, I think I want to make this O not so big at the top. Erase it a little bit, make it a little smaller. It just looked a little too big. And anything else before making the final copy. So now my entire group is together here. Everything is still separate. If you wanted to keep a copy of this so that if you want later on to move anything around independently, you could do that by saving this group almost as a backup. I like to do that. So if you hit this arrow, it collapses the group. It's still all together and you can still get all of these layers back. I like to duplicate my group. Now I have 2 copies of it. And I'm just going to hide the original one and keep it as a backup just in case I need it later. But then for the top one, what I'm going to do is merge all of these layers together. So instead of being able to move them independently from one another, I want them to be all on the same layer. And one way you can do that is by merging the layers like this, by merging them together. You can also tap on the group name and choose flatten. So I'll do it this way, where I just merge them all together. And now you can see there's only one layer in here, and it's all on the same layer. So now this is my draft lettering. I want to turn the opacity down a little bit so I can use it to trace. So to do that, I'm going to tap on the N on the layer name, and on the opacity slider, turn it down. So if you turn it to 0, it goes away. And if you go in between, you can see it's getting more transparent. I'm putting it around 25%. Okay, now I'm going to add a new layer. And if you want to get a layer out of a group, this doesn't really need to be in this group anymore because it's just one layer. You can just tap on it and drag it out of the group, and then just delete the group. So this is my draft. I added a new layer on top for the final lettering, and now I'm just going to go over with my brush and trace the final lettering. So instead of making this Y just have a loop at the bottom, it's going to go directly into that flourish that I added in the draft. You can see that I'm using undo quite a bit here by tapping my fingers on the screen like that. That's just because I know this is my final copy and I want it to be right on this one. And it's easier for me, I think, to just get it right on the first try, rather than if I made a mistake and I wanted to then erase part of it and then go back in and try to fix it and line it up. For me, it's just easier to make each stroke and undo it one stroke at a time rather than having to go back and erase parts and fix it. Okay, so this is usually what takes me the longest because sometimes I'm a perfectionist when it comes to lettering. But I'm just going to trace over the letters that I have here in my final copy. Now before I just had the letter E, but then I connected the flourish to it. So I'm going to go right from the E, the loop of the E, directly into this big flourish. Okay, so I ran that loop into the top of the E, so I'm going to undo that and try it one more time. Like I said, it's easier for me to just redo it rather than try to erase it and fix it. Okay, so since this is my final lettering, I'm actually going to just keep it all on one layer and write the word magical on this layer. I did keep my guidelines on, even though I already have a draft of the lettering. I think it's helpful to keep the guidelines on so that you can continue using them on the final draft. So now we have this really big flourish on the G. You can see that the streamline really helps that I showed you before, where it helps like self-correct some of the curves. You can see how many times I undo, so it is totally okay if you don't get it right on the first try. That's one of the benefits of digital lettering. Okay, so I'm just going to finish off this word magical for For this last flourish, I like to make the base of the L first, this part, and then go back in and add this flourish that connects it into the I. Okay, so now we have that lettering done. Go back to my layers, and if I uncheck the draft layer and the guideline layer, all we're left with here is the final result. So if there's anything else you wanted to do here to fix your lettering, I did notice that this line looks a little too thin compared to some of the rest of them. I just started to draw on the wrong layer, so I'm going to go back to my final lettering, maybe add a little bit more thickness there. If there's anything else you wanted to do to fix your lettering, this is the final copy. Okay, so now that this is done, we're going to add some glitter to it. See, one more thing I want to fix, and that is this E, just to make the loop a little smaller. Like I said before, it is kind of hard to go back and erase and fix it this way, which is why I like to do it right the first time, but you can always go back and try to erase. You can also see that I've been zooming in and zooming out a lot just to see what the effect is compared to the overall design, because sometimes when you're zoomed in really close, it can be hard to see what it looks like from the overall view. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that, how that looks. Now the next step is going to be adding some glitter. All right, so we have the lettering done, and Jillian here, I'm going to show you some really easy ways that you can add a background color and texture to your piece. So this is a pack of background textures, including really awesome paper texture. There's canvas, crepe paper, cardboard, craft paper. There's also tons of watercolor options that you can use, and then I'm actually just going to use an acrylic one, and it looks like it's black, but if you look up close there is a lot of texture in here, and I just want a little bit of added texture. So to copy this into my Procreate file, I'm going to tap and hold on it and choose copy. Then I will return to Procreate. I'm going to rotate my canvas this way because I know that the orientation of the picture is this way. So a quick trick for pasting is taking 3 fingers and swiping down, and it will bring up this menu and you can choose paste. Just tap the arrow to deselect it. So it's added this texture above my lettering layer, so I will want to move it down. To move the layer, I'll just drag it down all the way below everything. And now you can see some texture behind the letters. We like using a background texture instead of just a plain background color because it just makes the whole thing look a little bit more dimensional and interesting. Okay, let's get started with having some fun with the glitter brushes. We can hide the lettering for now. We will bring it back later. But for now, I'm going to show you what these glitter brushes look like. So they come in a set called the Shimmer set. And there's a ton of options in here. I love playing with all of these. They're so much fun. Let's just start with the one that's called Glitter. And another cool thing about this set is it comes with a color palette. So right now I'm going to choose this dark brown, which you might not think at first would look glittery, but when you actually write with the brush, look at that. It's amazing. The harder you press on it, and the more times you go over the same area, you can see it's getting brighter and brighter. And if you just use little pressure and go over small areas, not going over it too many times, then it's going to give you a less bright effect. And that's the awesome way that these brushes were created. All of the properties, the way that it renders is making it look like the glitter is popping off of the screen. So just to show you a couple of different colors, you can get a lot of tones of metallics here. Different golds, brasses, coppers. There's even like a rose gold, which is really pretty. Love that. Okay, so that was a glitter brush. Let's take a look at the glitter flecks. So this one is called Glitter Flecks, and when we draw with it and go over areas, it looks like pieces of glitter, like exactly what the name is, little flecks of glitter. And so the more you go over it, again, the brighter these pieces will get if you continue to draw over the same area. So it gives some really nice color variation. And there's another brush I like to use that's called Glow. Let's see what this one looks like. It's really pretty. Look at another color too. Changing the color that you use really can make a difference too with how the glitter ends up looking. Like this one looks a lot brighter. And this one's good for lettering because as you write with it, using less pressure gives you a thinner stroke and using more pressure gives you a thick stroke. So doing the combination allows for a calligraphy effect. Okay, one thing we can do to make this pop even more off of the background is adjust the background a little bit. So I just like to make sure I'm on the right layer. This is my background texture layer. I want to make it a little bit darker, so I can go up to my image adjustments and find hue, saturation, brightness. And the slider down in the bottom right, if you slide it up, it makes it closer to white. If you slide it down, it darkens it. So 50% is the original. I'm going to slide it down to 44%. You can see the percentage changing here. If I were to increase the saturation of this background, to me it looks slightly greenish. I'm going to just decrease the saturation to about 20%. So just to see the before and after, before this background was a little bit gray, a little bit light. Now after, it still has lots of texture in it, but having it darker makes the glitter look a little bit more like it's kind of popping off the screen. Okay, so now we're going to work on adding glitter to the actual letters. So let's clear this glitter layer just by tapping the layer and choosing clear. That was just to sort of experiment. And then I want to bring my lettering back. Okay. So on a layer above the lettering layer, I'm going to add some glitter. I like the second and third colors in this color palette. Let's start with the second one, this sort of medium brown. And the shimmer brush I will use for this step is the one called Glitter. So let's just color over, my brush is at maximum. We're just going to color over everywhere that the letters are. And again, the more you color over the same spot, then the brighter the glitter will get. So we want some variation in here. We want some pieces that are pretty bright and then some areas that are not quite as bright. I just want to make sure that everywhere that the letters are is completely covered. To fill the letters with the glitter, we'll turn this glitter layer into a clipping mask. So make sure that the layer is directly above your lettering layer. And then we can tap the layer to open this menu and choose clipping mask, and that's where the magic happens. So you can even continue adding on to the glitter layer, and as it's already set to clipping mask, it will just continue to fill in the letters. Okay. Let's create a shadow for the letters, just again to make it really pop. So the easiest way to do this is to duplicate the lettering layer. I'm going to slide it to the left and choose duplicate. And then on the second one down, we're going to move it a little bit. So let's zoom in so you can see exactly what's happening here. So I have the lower layer selected. Right now it doesn't look like anything happened, but if you remember, we originally wrote the lettering in black. So we have the black lettering with the glitter mask on top of it, and then we have another copy of the black. I'm going to move it down into the right a little bit by tapping the correct layer, selecting it with my arrow, and then I can drag this down into the right to add a super quick shadow. So it's like a black copy of the letters, and moving it down into the right makes it look like a shadow. If you want, you can blur this layer a little bit too, just to make the shadow look a little bit more realistic by going to Image Adjustments, and then Gaussian Blur, and then slide your pencil on the screen to the right until the percentage at the top says somewhere around 2.5–3%. Okay, and then to commit that change, just tap the wand again, and now we have a nice shadow. All right. So I'm going to add a new layer at the very, very top of my piece to add some more glitter. Still using the second color inside of the palette, but this time I'm going to use the Glitter Flex brush. Okay, so at the top of the screen, I'm going to start drawing some horizontal lines down the page, and the more I go over these areas, the brighter they will get. Like this. The effect I want is to have it brighter and more dense at the top, and then it will look like it's sort of raining down. You can even add like a little bit towards the bottom, just to add something special there. Okay, and then let's add a new layer on top of this, and we're going to use a new brush and a new color. Let's change the color first. So in my color palette, I'm using, it's the second row and it's the third one from the right, this color. It's a little bit different from the medium brown we were using. And the brush I want to use is called Loose Glitter. Okay, you'll see right away how different this one is. This is a lot denser glitter, and so I'm just going to do a horizontal stripe across the top. I'll do another one. And again, the more you go over it, the brighter it will get. No surprise there. That's how most of these brushes work. So I want it to be brightest and densest at the top, and I might even move, I'm glad I did this on its own layer, because I kind of want to move this up a little bit, just to make it a little bit less. And then I think I need to erase a little bit that I accidentally drew down there. Okay. So we have this very dense amount of glitter at the very top, and then it sort of rains down the page. Okay, and what are we going to do next? I think it would be really fun to add some flourishes around the letters with that glow brush. So I'm adding a new layer, and this one is situated right above the shadow layer and right under the original lettering. I'm using the same color I just used, and then for the brush, we're going to use the one called Glow. Here it is, Glow. Okay. So the thing about this brush is, let's just remind us what it looks like. It looks so bright, and here we just want to add some accents around the flourishes just to bring it to life a little bit and make it look more dynamic. So I'm just picking a few spots. I like to rotate my canvas so that I can have these curving the way that works best with my hand position here. And I'm just sort of tracing some of the flourishes that Jordan had written on the screen before, just to make some of these areas stand out a little bit more, just to add some more interest to the piece. Okay. This looks pretty nice. It's easy to sort of go overboard with this, but this brush is nice because as you add more pressure, so as you use less pressure, it's thinner, and then as you add the pressure, it gets thicker. So you can sort of use that to your advantage and make these start thin, swell to a thick line in the middle, and then go back to thin, just to make them look a little bit more graceful, like that. So comparing what this looks like before and after, you can see it just makes it pop a little bit more, gives it some more dimension, and I'm liking how that is looking. Okay, let's talk about a couple more fun things you can do to change this up a little bit. So if you put in all this work to create this glitter and you wanted to change the hue of it, maybe instead of gold, you wanted it to be like a rose gold or blue or purple, it's actually really easy. You don't have to redo the entire thing. You don't even have to adjust each layer on its own. You can use blend modes. So I added a new layer at the very top of the piece, and I'm going to pick a blue color, and I want this to be complementary to the gold that's showing up in the piece. So the first step is I'm going to tap and hold with my finger on the screen to get the eyedropper, and then I'm going to pick a sort of goldish color from inside of the piece. And you'll see that the color is changing in the top half of the circle. Like if I go over the black or the gray, it turns gray. So I just want to pick something that looks like a nice gold. Then in my color menu, I'm going to find the Harmony tool. And then in the top left corner here, you can, right under the word colors, it's going to give us some options: complementary, split complementary. And so I want to choose complementary, which basically is going to put that color I just eyedropped, that goldish color, is the primary color, and then the one that's complementary to it, if you remember, is the opposite side of the color wheel. So it's giving me this blue over here, just opposite of the color wheel. I mean, you can eyeball it, but using this tool is really helpful. Okay, so with that blue selected, whoops, I gotta tap on that circle to actually select it. With that blue selected, I'm going to fill the entire layer that I created at the very top. You can either tap the layer and choose fill layer, or you can just, once you have your color selected, just drag it onto the screen, let go, and it will fill the whole layer. So to change the color of the glitter to this blue, we're going to open that layer blend mode by tapping on the N inside of the layers panel. And here we have a whole list of blend modes at the very bottom, and then scrolling up a few. So this is what, the fourth from the bottom right now, is one called Hue. So it's making all of the goldish yellow hue, it's turning it to this blue and using what we've already created to make this look like we did the whole thing in blue glitter, which is pretty awesome. You can change the color here dynamically. Okay, so let's take a look and see if there's anything else we might want to do. We could just make the lettering blue instead of everything by moving this blue layer directly above that gold glitter clipping mask. And then it's turned it into a clipping mask, you can tell because there's a little arrow right here. So now the blue is only staying within the same area that the gold is, which is defined by that original lettering layer. Okay, so here we've just changed the letters. If you wanted to change everything but the letters, we could put this blue layer all the way back at the top, move our lettering layer with the gold clipping mask above the blue, and then that would keep the letters gold and then the rest of it blue. So whatever the blue layer that you've changed the blend mode to hue, whatever layers are below it will be affected by the change. So if, again, we wanted everything to be blue, we would put this at the top. It automatically changed it to a clipping mask, but we can undo that and make everything blue. Okay, I'm just gonna tap the undo arrow a couple of times until I get it back how I want it. Okay, really fun. So you can also change the color super easily and just pick a new color and drag it inside of that blue layer to very quickly change the whole thing to a different color. You can also experiment dynamically by going to your image adjustments. So first of all, making sure you're on that filled color layer. Go to your image adjustments, find hue, saturation, and brightness, and then drag the hue slider to the left and the right to find a color you like. You can even increase the brightness, change the saturation. So maybe if you want it to be like silver, you could decrease the saturation, increase the brightness, play around with all of these sliders and just have fun with it. So I'm going to undo that. I love the rose gold look. Okay, one more trick I want to show you. As you can see, there's so much you can do with this, but I want to show you how you can make a glitter dipped effect. So let's just bring all of this back to gold for now. And I'm going to hide everything except for my lettering layer and that background. So you can either individually uncheck all of this extra glitter, which might be a quick way to do it. You could also tap on hold on one of the layers that you want to keep, and then it will hide everything except for that layer. You would just then have to bring everything back that you want to show. So it depends on how many layers you have open. Sometimes doing the tap and hold on the checkbox is quicker. Okay, let's add a new layer right above the gold clipping mask. And I'm going to grab an airbrush. So under my airbrushing category, there's one called Soft Airbrush. And again, making sure I'm on the new layer here. Let's use that blue we had before. Just with an airbrush, go over the top half of these lines of letters. So you can draw a horizontal line that sort of cuts the letters in half, and then color over above it, like this. Okay, and then we can do the same thing on the word magical. We might need to erase parts of it that go over the word your because of how these flourishes are interacting. We can just keep it like this and erase this little piece. So basically I'm just trying to get the top half of the word magical. Okay, so let's turn this into a clipping mask by tapping the layer and choosing clipping mask. And now it looks like we had blue letters that we dipped into glue maybe, and then dipped into some glitter, and now the bottoms are gold. You can even change this hue, of course, as you wish. Make it maybe a little bit brighter, and that is looking pretty neat. Okay, let's bring back all of those other layers that we were working on. We still have those letter sketch layers, that group that we created originally. So if you want, you can always delete that. I'm going to keep it just so that I have a backup copy. And yeah, so you can just play around with the layers to make it look how you want, to adjust all of these things. This is something that people love about the Procreate app for lettering, is that on paper, once you write something, whatever color you chose and whatever size, you can't really change it after you've written it unless you want to sort of start over. But in Procreate, you can add all of these amazing touches like the glitter and changing the color as you go and experimenting. Maybe you don't like how that looks, you can just hide the layer. You don't have to start back over again. And that is just one of the really cool things about using Procreate for lettering. Thank you so much for watching our demo. Once again, this has been Jillian and Jordan from Loveleigh Loops. If you'd like to get the exact lettering that we've used and use it as a template in your own project, you can go to our website, lovelyloops.com/magical, and you can find this template. To use it, just copy it, return to the Procreate app, and paste it in. And then you can reduce the opacity of this layer so that it's a little bit easier to trace, add a new layer on top, and then you can go ahead and trace over it so that you can use this template. We encourage you to also check out the brushes that we used. So there are glitter shimmer brushes, and then we also have a ton of other resources, and some of the ones that we used in this project, like the background textures and the lettering brushes, are also available. So you can get the shimmer set, so you can use the exact same glitter brushes that we used, or you can get the complete bundle and save even more. These are also available at that lovelyloops.com/magical. Thank you again. We really appreciate you watching our demo, and we can't wait to see what you create. If you did decide to create this project, please tag us on Instagram at Loveleigh Loops so that we can see. Hope you enjoyed learning this project. Have fun playing with the glitter, and happy lettering.